Good afternoon and good morning and good evening as we have global representation here. Nice to see some familiar faces and nice to meet some new people as well. Today we get to spend an hour together and with multi-purpose of doing a little bit of learning together, sharing together. We're going to try and pull a couple of networks together for even greater impact. And we're also going to consider what is it that we can do moving forward to help support each other in intentionally small schools? So my name is Michael Johnston. I'm the assistant head of school at Frankfurt International School. And I'm joined by Jeremy Majeski, who's the principal at our First Steps to Grade 8 campus here at Frankfurt International School. And we've really been fortunate to work with Sarah to get this off the ground in terms of helping each other out and collaborating as a global group. And then I was very fortunate to receive a communication from Laura Benson. And she said, hey, I heard what you're doing. We're doing something similar. So how about we combine forces? And so we're going to talk about that today as well. So thanks. I think it's pretty early for you, Laura. So thanks for joining us. Much appreciated. All right. So as you can see, we've got people from all around the world feeling all kinds of different ways based on your emoji. It's okay. It's the end of March. Even without a pandemic, the end of March is always nutty in schools anyway, leading up to spring break. So however you're feeling, that's just fine. So let's do a little learning together. I'm going to do a tiny little mini lesson, and I hope it's helpful for people. We'll do a mini lesson, then we'll do the collaboration intro with Laura. We'll get to the Padlet resources and ideas, and then we'll talk next steps for collaboration. So before I dig in, is there anything that people have to ask or clarify or share before I just go into what I hope to be just a quick little 15-minute mini lesson? And the idea from this is that each time we get together, we would love to share the wealth on this mini lesson. So ideally, Jeremy and I and Sarah would love to hear from people within the network to say, hey, I would love to do a mini lesson that could help small schools. And we'll set you up for the next gathering so that you could do a little input off the get-go, and then we continue our collaboration. Is there anything I can clarify, or anybody that has anything to add? Is that appropriate information, Sarah, or you want to add anything to that?
Sure, I'll just say a very big welcome from ECIS, and just to reiterate how wonderful it is to see people from different continents. People are getting up very early in the morning, as well as people very late at night. This is one of our 16, I think, special interest groups at ECIS, and our youngest and boldest and nimblest perhaps of the special interest groups. So welcome, and we look forward to your contribution as well as your participation, and to growing this group if it's meaningful for our learning. So thanks very much to Jeremy, with whom I had this conversation originally about how important the intentionally small schools group would be, and to Mike for starting us off with this session today.
Thanks, Sarah. Jeremy, I'm just going to throw it out there that I think perhaps Frankfurt International School might be interested in hosting some of the first in-person gathering that we might be able to put together on our Wiesbaden campus. What do you think?
I think so. I think we'll be ready next year.
So, all right, let's dig in. So I hope this is helpful for people, and it's not meant to be anything other than an intriguer, get your thinking going, get the juices flowing for conversation. If you want more, just reach out. I don't mind at all. I'm going to expand on this next week at the ECIS Leadership Conference, which I'm so excited. I've been at Frankfurt International School for 2 years, and this is the first time I've gone to anything. So I'm really excited. I had to ask my assistant how I should get to the airport. So this is COVID, right? So I'm very excited. I'm going to expand a little bit on these ideas next week. And also, we actually work with some of these ideas. I'll tell you some parallel streams that we work with. In the end of the day, this is really about challenges and opportunities of a small school. If you have questions, throw them in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask at any point, because this is going to be a quick download that I hope leads us into some of our further conversations. So last time we were together, what came out very clearly, and Laura, you know, I know we're going to hear from your collaboration at all, but chime in at any time as well. The idea of being nimble as an intentionally small school, of having to wear multiple hats, of there being few gatekeepers, of access to resources, of people taking on too much. These just seem to be central themes. And I'll take it by the thumbs up there, Laura, that your group had some of those same things. Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel this at your school? Do you feel these things? Because this is the kind of thing that small schools have for opportunity and challenge. And what I'm gonna propose today is that we need to harness both sides of this. We need to be aware of the challenges, and we also need to take advantage of the opportunities. So what we'd like to do is we would really like to talk about this in the context of we're all complex change managers. So we use this model all the time in our school. We used it for our student change makers. We use it for our leadership for learning and middle level leader training. We use it all over the place. We use this iceberg tool because what it tells us is that if you really want to make lasting change, the deeper you go below the surface, the longer lasting it is. So, but really, for our purposes today, I'm going to really focus on the fact that there's really only two things you can change. So think of any change effort that you're working on. Remember, you're a nimble school, so you can change. And also, if you do too much change, it can exhaust people. So you're constantly living between these two worlds. So the only things that you can change are systemic structures and mental models. And you can also do them simultaneously at the same time. So today, just to set the scene, I'm gonna throw some tools at you. If you haven't used these kind of tools for your planning and for other things, then what I'd like to do is propose that if you want to reach back out, I can give you more details about these kind of things. So today, there's only two things we can change. So if there's only two things that we can change, and we're sitting in a small school, let's just focus today on change theory, systems, and mental models. Because if systems and mental models are the only things that we can change, then we need a toolbox to do so and to do so effectively. And in order to change systems and mental models, if we don't actually understand change theory, you know where you end up? You end up in some trouble. You end up with some unintended consequences. You end up with exhaustion. You end up with revolt. You end up with, there's all kinds of different scales of when you don't understand the change theory and then apply it in all these kinds of ways, then yeah, you do end up in trouble. So for today, we're going to concentrate on these three things. So I'm going to zip through all three of them, but stop me at any point because each one of these is a PhD on its own. Just so you know, these fields are so deep. Change theory. I have 40 books over there on my shelf on change theory. And I'm here to tell you this. They're all very similar, packaged differently with different frameworks and language, but they're all pretty much the same theory. So it's really important for you to understand that and to know, okay, if I know the theory and then I can apply it systemically and I can expose mental models and know them, then I'm much further ahead. So let's start with the systems. And I start with the systems. I love systems. My PhD is in organizational systems. I love to visualize complexity. I do this stuff all the time. And I'm always amazed when people come into my office and they start talking about something that's complex. And I find if you have a conversation about that complex thing, it doesn't really go anywhere. You kind of spin your wheels, right? And I've worked with some people here. Jeremy, I'm working with you right now. Ken, I used to work with you. Ken, you'd come into my office always. What were my walls covered with? Right? It's the maps. It's the visualization of the complexity. And we can, young people can do it. You know, anybody can do it. So it starts to look like this because complex systems, especially schools, are crazy complex. Now, here's the good news for small schools. You are less complex And the only reason that you are less complex, it's not that you don't do all the things that big schools do. You just have less parts in your system. And when you have less parts, what starts to happen is you can actually know those nodes and you can know those connections. So I'm going to start this with the biggest opportunity that intentionally small schools have. Your system is smaller, which means you can visualize your system in an easier way, which means you can plan change in an easier way. Now, unfortunately, that means that you also have to consider what it's going to take to create that change. So whether your system is super complex with all kinds of interconnected nodes, or whether it's slightly smaller and less nodes, you're always just looking for that opportunity of changing what? Remember, there's only two things you could change. What are the only things you could change? The system and what people think, the mental model. That's it. That's all you can change. So it sounds so simple, but actually applying that in practice can be a little bit tricky. So what are we looking for in these systems to create that change? We're looking for the leverage point. Where can we intervene in the system to make a change so that that impacts that, impacts that, impacts that, impacts that? I recorded for the ECIS conference next week, I recorded for the virtual conference an activity of visualizing complex systems. And so that workshop is in the archive for ECIS to use. But that's why I said this whole systems piece it's a whole PhD unto itself. But the key for us in small schools is we have to visualize the system. And it is an opportunity because we have less nodes. It doesn't mean it's going to be easier per se. It just means that it can be much simpler to actually visualize because you have less parts to that system. That's the systems piece. Let's talk mental models. If we're trying to change mental models, here's the good news and the bad news about intentionally small schools. The good news is sometimes you just have to change one mental model for the change to be successful. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. If that one mental model is a gatekeeper that is really hard to change the way they think and their perceptions and beliefs, that's extremely hard work because one person can hold everything back. So that's the good news and the bad news. So what we do is we plan this very intentionally to know, all right, what is it that we're actually doing with these perspectives of mental models, right? Because we have access to the same facts. The question is, how do we shift people's mental models? Is it going to be worth the effort to shift their mental model? And if I don't shift their mental model, is it going to run me into trouble later? Because you can shift mental models and you can sit and change systems, or you can do them at the same time, but you only have so much time in the day. Because don't forget, you're at an intentionally small school, which means you wear multiple hats, which means you can't do everything at the same time. It's very complex. So here's a challenge for you. When we look at these mental models, I want you to think about how you provide this experience for the people in your small school. And this is both the challenge and the opportunity. Let's replace this log crocodile with assessment practice change, okay? You want to change assessment in your small school. One person saying this, one person saying that. I believe this. I believe that. How do mental models change? Mental model shift. There it is. You just saw it in action. So I want you to think about your small school. I'm not advocating that we need to feed teachers to the crocodiles. But what is it about small schools that is difficult to shift mental models? Think of it this way. If you have a grade 5 team that has 5 fifth grade teachers on it. Okay. And then you're in a small school. How many people here have one section of fifth grade? A couple people. Some of you have 2 sections of fifth grade. Okay. So think of it this way. Mental model shift has to be observable and it has to have trialability. So unfortunately, here's your challenge. If you only have one teacher, that's the only person that you need to get the trialability with. So you have to find a way for them to see without getting eaten, right? But if you have a team of 5, most of the time in a team of 5, you're like, okay, I got an early adopter. I got somebody who's up for it, but they'll follow this person. I got a couple people who are like, yeah, I'll do whatever the team's doing. And you got somebody who's just like, oh, great, a new principal wants me to do something new. This will pass, right? But when you got one person, that can be trickier mental model work. So when it comes to the mental models, those are the things that we want to consider. We really do want to consider what tools should we use to kind of expose these mental models. I personally love the ladder of inference. If people ask me in complex change theory, what are the tools I use the most? The systems iceberg I use the most, the ladder of inference that I use the most, systems mapping I use the most. I would put those as the top 3 that I use, not all the time viscerally and drawing and whatnot. It's just running through my head. Because this ladder of inference, if you're not aware of how mental models are created and how the observable facts become the actions, I highly suggest go to TED Ed, watch the movie on ladder of inference, get familiar with this tool, because it will not only help you to manage complex change, it will make you a happier human being, because you'll understand why people do what they do without getting super frustrated at it. Don't get me wrong, I still get frustrated, but I look at a situation now and I go, why'd they do that? Why'd they say that? Where I used to be, I can't believe they said that. What an idiot. Right? And you shift your thinking, because as you start to understand where mental models come from, it's super important to use those tools. As I said, this is three PhDs in 20 minutes. So if mental models and systems are the only things that we can change, we can't really change those without understanding change theory. Personally, my favorite, Everett Rogers, the godfather of change, the first one to basically say, listen, if a system is going to adopt a new innovation, which is what you do all the time, this is what you do all the time. You want change assessment, you want to use portfolios, you want to change the duty schedule, you want to change your schedule, you want to, whatever change it is, you are trying to get your system to adopt a new innovation. And Everett Rogers has written about this for over 5 decades. And his initial study was about farm equipment, tractors. And he couldn't understand why farmers would not buy a tractor, and they stuck with their horse. Sound familiar, complex change managers? You're looking at your educators going, I can't believe you're trying to average grades. Seriously? Sell the horse, man. Buy a tractor. But they don't do it. Why don't they do it? Now, there's several reasons. We don't have time to get into that. But on this adoption curve, what ends up happening is you can absolutely understand where you are, because if you don't hit that takeoff point, it's just another failed initiative. So here's what Everett Rogers said. He said, in terms of the adoption over time, if you don't get to your mainstreamers, so for example, with the tractor equipment, it got to a point where enough people bought the tractors that the neighbors were looking over going, oh, geez, he's got more free time than me. She's got more free time. What do I do with this? Well, I better get a tractor. It's going to cost me more up front. Oh, just like learning that a new assessment system is going to cost me more up front. But actually, I'm going to save time later. But human beings aren't so good at looking at upfront cost for long-term gain. Just look at our politics right now. So when we do that, we start to understand where we are. So Everett Rogers, I love the change theory, because innovation does not mean it has to be new and shiny and technology and that kind of thing. Innovation just means it's new to that system. So all those things that you're managing are new to the system. So how are you going to manage them? Well, it depends on the system and it depends on people's mental models. Because remember, those are the only two things you could change. So to me, I look at Everett Rogers and I think, okay, I can put names on every, I want you to start to put names on each of these parts of this adoption curve. You got some innovators? You got some early adopters? You got the early majority, the late majority. Those are the mainstreamers, we call them, in the middle. You got your laggards. Down with change. The earth is flat. I know you're putting names on that right now, aren't you, in your organization? So as you manage this complex change, I love to use things like Nostrville and 1000. I use this grid to actually create the change because I make sure that all these things are present. Are people clear on the vision? Because if they're not clear on the vision, but you have all the other pieces to the change, people are confused. They don't know why they're changing. This is probably the biggest one. You haven't given them the skills. So there's anxiety. Lack of incentives, resistance. It's not resource. Now, resources doesn't just mean money. I don't like this symbol on this. What's the biggest resource in an intentionally small school? What's the biggest cost in an intentionally small school? It's time, right? It's time. We had a great question. What about if the innovation is not a new innovation, but actually slowing down, deep diving into what we are currently doing, taking stock of the why we do what we do? Absolutely. So remember, it's still innovation because it's new to that system. How do you teach the system and the people within the system to shave things off? One of the hardest things to do in complex change management is let things go. I love Kevin Bartlett's line, create the to-don't list. It's one of the hardest things to do because people's mental model is that everything is important, especially when you're in departments. Go tell your math department that you're going to take some time away from specific math time because you're going to do innovative, authentic project time, and you want them to integrate into that. No, we need more math time. It's time's time. Got to take it from somewhere. So yeah, great question. It's still innovation, same change theory. So I prefer this one, right? And I borrowed it from the ISP group. It's adopted and adapted from Nostrville and 1000 as well. But I actually use this as a template for complex change management. And I try and identify if any of these things are missing, then we need to be aware of that. So for me, it's this whole toolbox of understanding systems, understanding mental models, understanding change theories. And then you put all this stuff together, and in these intentionally small schools, you got to just decide what's worth it. This graphic is taken from our Leadership for Learning course, which is all our middle level leaders and aspiring leaders. These are the toolboxes that we build for them to know how to manage the complex change within their department or their grade level or whatever it might be. What may be fascinating to you is this is the exact same toolbox that we used at our Student Changemaker conference last week. Because if you want students to create change, it's no different how old you are. If you want them to have a robust service learning experience, same tools, same thinking, same concepts. And even though they're younger, doesn't mean they can't do it. Change theory, systems, mental models. The opportunity and the challenge of the small school. You have the opportunity to do more. You also have the challenge of not doing too much with what you have. I hope that's helpful. My goal was by 2:30 here. I got in under 2 minutes. Is there anything anybody wants to clarify or ask? I'm also happy to follow up after this. I hope that's helpful. All right. What I do find is as people digest the theories, the tools, and the other pieces, they'll often come back later and say, hey, tell me more about this. And I'm absolutely happy to share a resource or lead you somewhere or help you out in any way, because we're all in this together. Love the question. Is there a particular kind of person, teacher, support team members who's attracted to smaller schools? Any data out there to suggest that they are more likely to adapt to change differently to those in larger schools? Great question. I'll throw that question out to the group. I have my thoughts on it, but you're all leaders and people in smaller schools. What do you think about that? Are they attracted? Is there a certain type of person that's attracted to smaller schools? Do we know? Are they more adaptable? What do you think? Jump in if you want.
I'll chime in because I think that in my career, I've definitely worked at a whole variety of schools, but have chosen to work at intentionally small schools and have recruited people who have that same kind of mindset. I don't know what particular criteria there are about that. I think it's partly a mindset that is, about a community, about lots more opportunities, as you referenced earlier, Mike. When you're at a small school, you wear multiple hats. So myself as an elementary principal, I'm also in leadership team conversations about admissions and enrollment on a bigger scale for the school, about finance. So, and also as an administrator at a small school, I had the original impression that I'd be able to be in the classrooms more because there's fewer to get to, but wearing more hats is the reality that maybe you don't. So I do think that there is a particular kind of person that looks for small schools.
Yeah, at least a skill set for sure, huh?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do have to say, when I'm interviewing to hire people, you can look for this stuff specifically, right? Look for that, do they adopt change? Are they constantly asking questions? Are they the type of person that's just going to roll with it? But also you don't want somebody that's too malleable. They'll just do anything. Just right. So I'd say think about that in the interview process. This is a great question, Sarah.
So the reason I ask it is because quite often small schools, start off as newly founded schools, and so you want to be looking for innovators rather than maintainers within that kind of environment, and then they evolve, of course, hopefully they evolve into established schools. But you need to know, if you're going to a small school, that you are going to be wearing lots of hats. You need to know that the nature of the job, whether that's in the classroom or whether that's in support, is different to where you have large departments and so forth. And so I was interested to know whether anybody's got any data on that or whether it's simply at an anecdotal level at this stage.
I'm not sure. This would be something interesting to dig in deeper.
Mm-hmm.
So Laura, you included a great segue there, because I think that's a perfect place to introduce the questions and things that your group's been talking about, because you're having some of these same conversations.
Yeah, hello everyone, I'm Laura Benson, and I started a professional learning network for small international schools. Anyone's invited to be a part of it from around the world, but just seeing the blessings and challenges of being a small school educator. One being the limited numbers, so being together, we could kind of develop a community that gave us more thought partners and more problem solvers. But we looked at just the idea of there's some research and some details about this in the fourth shelf of the Padlet I just put into the chat, because I've been looking at, I think a lot of it is as a small school educator, and I see my dear friend Brad McLean here too, you're kind of a Peace Corps educator in many cases, partly because in some cases, if you're a small school, as Sarah's saying, you're starting and you're growing the school. And then sometimes because you're in a remote location and you're don't have access to many of the opportunities or other people that you might have in your home country or a previous bigger school. So the idea of connectedness, the idea of wearing many hats, the idea of being a problem solver, the idea of being a community, big thing that we've talked about in our own small schools PLN is because we started during the pandemic. We've talked a lot about social and emotional learning and well-being of our children, our students, and our adults, all the educators in our community and our parents and our surrounding connections. So we've had to work really thoughtfully in coming together. And yesterday we did a lot of work in mindfulness, and we also did a lot of work. We just met day before yesterday. We also did a lot of work in sharing strategic plans, or in other words, we share and work on that which you would usually work on with a bigger leadership team. But in a small school, you are sometimes the built-in leader, and that's the only immediate leadership colleague you have is yourself, or maybe one other person. So we've tried to think about the blessings and challenges of being a small school educator. You'll see them in our Padlet. We have, anywhere from just who we are and the blessings and challenges of a small school, blessings in one shelf for column and challenges in the other. And then we've tried to think about things like co-teaching, or, when you're the librarian or the PE teacher, again, you're one person on many staffs, that's true, of course, but how the teachers could work together a little bit more strategically with time. Mike, as you said, that's the biggest cost and scarcity of that sometimes. So we've tried to problem solve special ed issues, co-teaching issues. The other one that we've wrestled with a lot and done some incredible work around is multiple grades. We have some schools that are so small, they have maybe 42 kids, or maybe even up to 100. But let's take the case of the 42 students. Then what's happening there is teachers are teaching 3 or 4 grade levels at one time. So how do you deal with the standards? How do you deal with just shepherding students' learning and giving them also thought partners? I have one school, small school, where there's 4 kids in the high school. And that's pretty challenging in terms of like discussions and debates and writing feedback and science, STEM projects and project-based learning. So we've tried to combine forces with our PLN also to give kids some more learning partners, to give adults some more thought partners and problem-solving friends.
So I think, Laura, what's been an amazing start for us now is when I spoke with Laura, she said, hey, we're already having these conversations, and she just linked that Padlet in the chat. And she also said, well, why don't we use a similar template so we can look at each other's template and actually share resources in that way. Not having the same resource, because there will be different contexts that will be going on. We'll probably have different topics. We'll have different headings. But when you take a look at what we've done here is we basically took the Padlet format, and Laura's done an introduction there and a link. We have our hopes and wants, our blessing and benefits, our current challenges. And then we kept some of the headings with a couple of the articles that we thought would resonate with this group that would be helpful as a start. We can also add sections. So what we're going to propose for the next section of this is we're going to invite you to this Padlet. And then you're going to be in a group of 3 or 4. And in that group, what we would like you to do is we would like you to start to add to the hopes and wants for our collaboration, and any other category that you have either something to share, or it's possible that you might actually just add another section to be considered. Because where we want to get to is we want to get to as a group where we have a pattern of when we're getting together. We also want a way to share things in an online resource, so that when Laura says things like policies that we can just share with each other and gives us such a good head start on our own work, we have ways to share that. So is there anything I can clarify before I throw you into a room where the only reason you're in that room is just to bounce ideas off of each other? You can still be anywhere you want on the Padlet, but you can just talk through your thinking And we were thinking about 7 to 10 minutes where we're just populating ideas on our Padlet as a start. You have access to the Padlet that already exists for the ISS collaboration as well, and we will link it to ours. But is there anything I can clarify before you just get to know a couple of people in a room and give it a shot? You can add either category or under each of the category, you can add resource, question, thought. Don't worry if it's messy right now. We're just getting our thinking out there. Okay.
So I see I have the link to the small school Padlet that Laura provided. The one you just shared on your screen is a separate Padlet.
It is.
And can you put that? I don't have the link to that. If you could drop it.
There's only one reason that you don't have that link yet, because as soon as everybody's clear with the instructions, you'll have it.
Okay. Early adopter. Sorry, I'll back off there.
So you're exactly right. It's coming. Yeah, we're good. There it is. Go for it. All right, welcome back. So I was just telling one group, it's only been 2 years in a pandemic and I still forget to give the share permissions to the Padlet. So you now have share permissions to the Padlet. But we also had a comment in another group that said, it was just nice to talk to people in the same context, which I actually just added to the Padlet. I said, if for nothing else, when we do get together, to have different mixes of people to just talk things through. Super valuable. I think that's a lot of what we've missed in going to conferences and whatnot for the last couple of years, because we did that a lot. So we had our welcome. We did our mini lesson. Laura so generously shared what ISS is doing and gave us a template to start our resource share. You got on the Padlet and we started to have a conversation. And with the couple minutes that we have left, what's next? What do we think, and this is something you can add to the Padlet, what do we think would be a great way to share asynchronously and synchronously? So what would be the best ways for us to do that? How often would we like to touch base? Is there a web portal that we'd like to store those resources behind a password? Because we do understand that some of these things are sensitive information and we would have to agree as part of the organization that confidentiality is very important. Just curious to hear people's thoughts. Feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat. You can also tell us a little bit about your conversation if you like. So what do you think? What would be a good way to move forward? Laura, what's the plan for the ISS group? How often?
We've met 5 times now. We're going to meet again in May. And so I'd say every 6 to 8 weeks has been a pretty good spot for us. I'm constantly trying to read the lay of the land because there are times where it's highly stressful. And so sometimes, for example, China right now, I have colleagues that are barricaded in their apartment building and can't leave. Yeah. Then I have other colleagues who are getting to travel. So we're just trying to be sensitive to, that's one reason we have the Padlet, to tell you the truth, is to make it as agile and accessible and equitable as possible in sharing thinking. And then I just make myself available for, if they couldn't attend the meeting, we record it, I send it to them, but I also am willing to, sit and talk with them. Because again, a lot of the blessing and challenge of being a small school is not having enough thought partners sometimes. So just trying to be sensitively a thought partner. Another big thing I'd say, Mike, is that we have a membership list on a Google Doc. And so that it's not just about our meetings, it's so they can reach out to each other independently throughout the year. So we've identified special areas of interest or expertise even, so that they can reach out. You could go to Brad about anything about social well-being. He's a former counselor. He's one of the best heads of schools I've ever worked with. So if, as a fellow head of school or as a fellow person committed to compassionate culture at your school, they know they can go to Brad. And so I think that's another part maybe for you all, is to think about definitely getting together like this, but also having a way to reach out to each other in addition to the meetings.
Great. Super helpful. Thank you.
Like something I'm thinking about is, and maybe this is just the way I learn best, is something like a Facebook group or something of that nature,
Yeah.
where we can kind of, as we have questions, we kind of throw them out there to individuals, that kind of stays out of the inbox a little bit. But then also, a Padlet's a nice idea, but it's one thing I'd have to go to, type of thing to look at a resource. And I find some sort of online portal of where things are pushed to me and we can ask questions would be really great. I've got a couple of topics in mind I'd love to push out to people in the coming weeks.
Does something like that exist? Is there a intentionally small school social network out there?
Yeah, we have one emerging on Facebook. So
I don't
And,
see why, I don't see why those wouldn't combine.
yeah.
Some of our SIGs do have a Facebook group, and that would be certainly something that we could join together with ISS on. And then we have a website where on our web page for SIGs, for special interest groups, each of the web of the special interest groups has its web page, and that is something that we'd be looking to grow so that we can have a platform for, where resources and so forth can be access to people who are perhaps not actively at the moment actively involved, but maybe would want to know more about, so that we're posting on our events page when these get-togethers happen, when the webinars, as it were, happen, but also that there's a space for people to be able to see that they can turn to this person in an area of expertise, or to this resource, or so that would be worth growing as well, alongside the opportunity for spontaneous, because I think what Jeremy's talking about there is more of a spontaneous opportunity to be anybody out there that's got some information on this,
Which I imagine people use the Google Doc for that, Laura. So I'm looking for contacts. I'm going to reach out to Brad or whatever it might be. So in the interest of people's time, here's a summary that I have, and Jeremy and I will take this away and look to make a membership list so people know who to contact, and we'll start to build that. And then look at the possibility, we had a good suggestion in the chat, between Padlet, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, like try and find what the best way to do that would be. Sarah, my understanding is we will set the next get together. So we'll set that date and get that out quickly. And Laura, I wonder if we don't aim before the end of the year, what time of day does yours happen? Middle of the day?
Well, mine happens like at 5 or 6 in the morning, my time. So
Same time as this?
Yeah, so that we can grab as many people around the world as possible.
How about we aim for one combined session before the school year is over between the two collaborations?
Sounds great.
All right, super. So we'll aim for one combined session, one independent session. We'll set those dates. We'll look at the social media. We'll get that membership list going. And for our session, we'll be looking for somebody to give us a little mini lesson. Who knows, maybe something on like social well-being of students in a small school. I don't know. Anybody know anybody who could do something like that? Yeah. Brad, I'm looking at you, staring directly at you in that cell. Anyway, if people are interested in something like that, I think it would be a very interesting practice just to get in a quick hit mini lesson, something that just builds and gets conversation going. And then we go from there. We were 4 seconds over. Great session, everybody. Appreciate the time. And get there to spring break. Keep her going.